actually took
Good afternoon, everybody. Is this working? In this cool? All right, I would like to welcome Senator Tim Kaine, and I know Ryan McElvain from our school board will be here very shortly. If he's not here already, he's in the audience. But and also, of course, most of all, I want to welcome all of you. As a former government teacher myself, this is a tremendous opportunity for you all to interact with your representative in the U.S. Senate. I also like to thank in advance Mr. Clement for organizing this and the entire speaker series. Senator McCain has invited all the candidates from all the local races to come join us. And at this time, everybody, I would like to introduce our senior, Leah Tyrell, who is here to introduce Senator Kaine.
Tim Kaine, a former civil rights lawyer, is Virginia's junior U.S. Senator. He was the 2016 Democratic nominee for Vice President, former Lieutenant Governor of Virginia, former Governor of Virginia, and Richmond Mayor and City Council member. Kaine is a member of the U.S. Senate Health, Education, Labor and Pensions, Budget, Armed Services, and Foreign Relations Committees. He lives in Richmond with his wife, Ann Moulton, former Virginia Secretary of Education, and they have 3 adult children. Senator Kaine is a huge personal example, inspiration to me, and I am honored to introduce him as your speaker. So without delay, I present Senator Tim Kaine.
What a treat. Man, this gives me a lot of energy, and I need some now. We're 12 days away from an election, and at the end of any election, you get really tired. Your voice starts to fade, and you get really beat. But when you walk in and see a crowd like this, that's just such a jolt. So thank you for the invitation, for the chance to be here at Chantilly. I want to thank your principal, Mr. Clement. Thank you for setting this up and arranging it. I've got a couple of staffers here. Let me just point them out. Brandon Gasway is my press secretary on the campaign. Tyler Johnson's my executive assistant in the Senate office. Alice Tong is the political director of the campaign. So those are the 3 full staffers that I have with me. What I really want to do is talk about what you want to talk about. Take your questions, take your advice, get educated on things I need to know more about. But why don't I just jump in and spend a few minutes telling you how I got into politics, what I do in the Senate, why I'm running for re-election. So how I got into politics. I grew up in a really non-political family. We never talked about politics growing up. My parents were Republicans. I always tell people, why are you a Democrat? When I realized my parents were Republicans, I became a Democrat. That was my youthful rebellion at age 14. But we just weren't into politics. My parents were voters. They were civically active, but it was just not their thing. Politics seemed very foreign. We read newspapers. It was like Hollywood or pro baseball. It would be something that would be in the newspaper. We never knew anybody whose names were in newspapers. Went to college at the University of Missouri, Harvard Law School. Took a year off in the middle of law school to go work with missionaries in Honduras. Ran a school that taught kids to be welders and carpenters. My dad was an iron worker and welder, had a small shop that my brothers and I worked at. That experience was really transformative for me. And when I came back from Honduras to law school, it was like, okay, I really want to use my law degree to help people out. I didn't really know any lawyers. I didn't know necessarily what that meant, but over the course of finishing law school, I decided to be a civil rights lawyer. Moved to Richmond, met a beautiful Virginian, my wife Ann, who grew up in Roanoke. She graduated actually from Langley High here in Fairfax in 1976. We met in law school, decided to come back to Virginia, and I started practicing civil rights law in Richmond. Most of my work was representing people who've been discriminated against either because of their race or because of their disability, largely in housing, but I did some voting rights cases, some employment cases, and I did that for 17 years, and I thought I'd do it forever. I was perfectly happy doing that. But I started to get mad at my city council. I had a homeless shelter that I used to represent. And when they would have a matter that needed to come up with the city council, I would go. It usually wouldn't be controversial. But I would watch my city council in Richmond divide along racial lines. Richmond's got a painful history. Capital of Confederacy, a lot of challenges. And so my city council, often on issues of controversy, white council members would vote one way, African American members another way. And as a naive young person, I thought, well, I think we should be able to work together a little better. And so in 1994, 24 years ago, I ran my first race for office, city council, won by 91 votes. That was my first race. I'm now running in my 10th. Until 2016, I could say I was undefeated. I can't say that. I can say I've never lost a popular vote. I've never lost the Virginia vote, but I can't say that I'm undefeated. But I had a great time in local office, 2 terms council, 2 terms as mayor, then lieutenant governor and governor, now in the U.S. Senate. My whole career, though, has been very much influenced and affected by my wife. We really try to do things in tandem. I told you my family was non-political. Her family was very political. My wife's father was the first Republican governor of Virginia. He was elected in 1969. Virginia schools were still segregated. And as the Republican governor, he integrated the public schools of Virginia. And people were furious at him for doing it. And he actually did it with my wife and her brothers and sisters. He decided, not only am I going to stop the state's efforts to ban busing and maintain segregation, I'm going to have my kids go to essentially majority African-American schools to show that we can all learn together. There were a lot of pictures in the civil rights era of Southern governors standing in schoolhouse doors blocking African-American kids from coming in. There's only one picture, it was on the front page of the New York Times, of my father-in-law escorting my wife's sister into a public high school in Richmond that was essentially a majority black high school. Big smile on his face, saying integration's fine, we can all learn together. He's my political hero, even as a Democrat. My father-in-law, he's now 95 years old. And although people were real mad at him, and he was never able to get elected to anything after he was governor because they were so mad, now that he's 95, people say, now that was a great governor. He's lived long enough for his reputation to like come around and catch up to him. People realize he did a good job. I love being in the Senate. Oftentimes, people who have been mayors or governors are very unhappy in the Senate. And they're unhappy because they've been used to kind of being at the top of the pyramid, and in the Senate, you start at the bottom. I was 95th in seniority when I started in the Senate. But the reason that I love it is I get to work on issues I care a lot about. First name again is Leah. Leah mentioned the committees that I'm on. And that is that's where you do most of your work. So I'm on armed services. Virginia is the most militarily connected of any of the states. Active duty, Guard, Reserve, veterans, DOD civilians, DOD contractors, military families. About 1 in every 3 Virginians directly connected to the military. And I am. My oldest son's an infantry commander in the Marine Corps. He's been in the Marine Corps for about 6 years. He's a captain. And so this is really important, keeping the country safe. I have a special focus on armed services and the unemployment rate of veterans and military spouses, trying to bring down their unemployment rate. Second, foreign relations. I lived abroad. I lived in Honduras, so I really care about the world and the role of the U.S. in the world. But I don't want to just be militarily strong. If anything, you need to be strong diplomatically first so that you reduce the risk or the likelihood that you ever need to put troops into harm's way. On the Foreign Relations Committee, I mostly work on Latin America because of my time in Honduras. I'm fluent in Spanish, one of 3 senators that can travel to Latin America and interact with leaders without a translator, and it's very helpful. And I also do a lot of work on the Middle East. In fact, I'm the lead Democrat on the committee that oversees U.S. actions in the Middle East. I'm on health, education, labor, pension. So all of healthcare, all of education, including an important one, the education of the healthcare workforce. We have a lot of shortages in the healthcare workforce these days. And then labor and pension issues, from collective bargaining to minimum wage to pensions of public and private employees. And then the last committee I'm on is the budget committee. But I'll tell you what I really like about the job, the part that's really fun, is everywhere I go, and it's going to happen in this room, I'm going to predict, somebody tells me something I didn't know. They tell me about a problem I didn't know about. Hey, Senator, did you know that the veterans' unemployment rate is much higher than the national average? Well, when somebody told me that, when I was first running for Senate, I didn't know. A family came into my office shortly after I was elected, whose daughter had died of cancer at age 11. And they said, Senator, did you know that of all the medical research we do in the country, only 1% is on pediatric conditions, children, childhood diseases? I didn't know that. Well, when Virginians tell me things I didn't know, then I say, is there a way we can work to solve this? And much of my legislation deals with that. Virginians also give me solutions all the time. Somebody told me a few months ago to go to the Chesterfield County Jail of all places to learn about a great program to help addicts break addiction. So I went and I visited with 70 men in a recovery home project and then 60 women on the women's side of the jail. And they told me that what was going on in the jail had helped them break addictions that they had been unable to break for 30 or 40 years. And so I was able to take that idea back to Congress. I wrote a bill about it. I introduced the bill. Yesterday, President Trump signed a bill to deal with opioid addiction. And the piece that I wrote, because I went to the Chesterfield County Jail, was now signed into law. President Trump has signed 20 of my bills into law. President Obama signed 11 of my bills into law. Whether I agree with the president all the time or not, I'm always trying to figure out, can I get a bill on the president's desk that will do something good for somebody? And so that's the part of the job that is, frankly, the most enjoyable. Politics is tough. It's a tough climate right now. You definitely don't want to read what people say about you online. That's not But it's a challenging climate. But if you can do something like this opioid bill, get it on the president's desk, have it signed, make headway. I got a bill done for medical research for kids after I talked to the Miller family about their daughter. It's just always satisfying and exciting. I'm running for re-election to the Senate. So I've been in one term. November 6th is election day. I hope many of you are registered to vote and will. The theme of my campaign is pretty simple. I tried to sum up what I've tried to work on for 34 years. A Virginia that works for all. It's about Virginia. As I told you, listening to Virginians and either solving problems or bringing Virginia solutions to Washington. It's about work, the trained workforce. You know, if we get the workforce issues right, then we're going to do fine. And that means education from pre-K to post-grad. It means career and technical and apprenticeships. It means immigration reform. Here's something that's really important. I believe this so passionately, and again, probably because of my pivotal experience working in Central America. Often when you hear people talk about immigration in politics, it's always just about a problem. You know, it's about MS-13 or about a caravan. But they never talk about what's really powerful and excellent and important about immigration. From the very beginnings of the nation, immigration has been like the continuous transfusion of our bloodstream to kind of keep us young and healthy. In fact, go back and read the Declaration of Independence. We all know the main part. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. We know that part, but most of the Declaration of Independence is Thomas Jefferson saying, King George, you did this wrong. You did this wrong, you did this wrong. And one of the things that Jefferson writes, you wouldn't let us have an immigration system to bring the most talented people to the country. So from the very beginning, that's what immigration has been about. So if we're going to be a Virginia that works, it is about education. It is about fair wages. It is about fair taxes so that we don't treat workers worse than investors and we don't treat people worse than corporations. But immigration reform has to be part of it. And then the last piece of it, the last theme for me, it's a Virginia that works for all. Those last two words of the Pledge of Allegiance that you guys have said your whole life at school. I'll conclude and I want to tell you about the Pledge of Allegiance and about why I'm so focused on it. I think I'm focused on those words for all because we're living in a time where, to my way of thinking, the message that's sent from the top, even from the White House, is not a for all message. It's a for some, or for few, or for me message. And yet, we pledge in schools, we pledge in the Senate every day, and we finish with those words for all. The Pledge of Allegiance was written by a minister in New England in the 1890s. He wanted to write a pledge that expressed the essence of being an American. His name was Francis Bellamy. He wanted that pledge to be said by every child in every school, in every city, in every county in the United States every day. And he wanted it to be said to a flag on the wall. It took him 15 years to do this, to write the pledge, to get the flags to every school, and to have the pledge said by every student every day. But I like the fact that he didn't finish it with liberty and justice, period. It's not just a nation under God, indivisible, devoted to liberty and justice, but it's liberty and justice for all. If it's not working for all, it's not working. If it's not working for all, those of us who are in office have more work to do. And so that's I think the real question about this moment in time. Are we for all or are we for some? Some are hoping that they might see a blue wave on November 6th. I'll tell you what I want to see. I want to see a wave of compassion. I want to see a wave of character. I want to see a wave of decency. I want to see a wave of us standing up for who we really are and showing to the world who we really are. Because I frankly think the example that's being set right now, bluntly, is not who we are. When you have somebody in the White House who no parent is saying to their child, please act like that. Please talk like that. Please treat someone like that. Please treat your family like that. No one is encouraging their children to behave in the way that the leader of our country is behaving. And I think that's a tragedy. And I think on November 6th, we have an opportunity to put a whole lot of people in office who are the kind of people that we could tell our kids or tell anybody in the world that they should look up to. Not just their policies, but how they act and how they behave. So I hope to continue to represent Virginia for a good long while. I love doing events with students. I don't do many events at high schools. I mean, I'll do graduation speeches, but there aren't many high schools that invite elected officials to come in and just talk. I think I've probably done, I'm just looking at Tyler, 3 or 4. Yeah, 3 or 4, all around Virginia. So the fact that you guys do have people in to do this says something good about you, says something good about your teachers. And with that, I'm really happy to come, and I'd love to open it up, take questions, advice, get educated, and all I would ask is if you have a question, just introduce yourself as you ask it. Thanks so much for having me. Appreciate it. Right here. And I'm going to repeat the question since I have a mic. Go ahead, Kate.
In light of recent law threats against Democrats across the country, complimenting security today or with security detail protection from that?
So Kate's question was, in light of the news about bomb threats, did I come with any security? And the answer is no. Senators don't get security. If you're in leadership, you do. Because some leadership are in the line of succession, right, to the presidency, so they do provide security for some leadership. And second, I get security if I'm on Capitol Hill. But if you're a regular senator or House member, we don't get any security. I'm going to be real blunt about this. I said this once publicly, and the Capitol Police and Sergeant Arms was very mad that I said that. They didn't want me to say it. After the shooting of members of Congress at the softball game a couple of years back, right here in Alexander, everybody remembers that. We got asked, well, hey, so what kind of security should you have? And I said, we don't get any. And the Sergeant Arms said, you shouldn't have said that. You shouldn't have told people out there that senators and congressmen don't get security. And I said, if you're worried about my security, you should provide me security. But don't ask me to lie about it. I'm not going to lie about it. So there's a core of the leadership of both houses that gets security, but other than that, when we're off Capitol Hill, we don't. So when this happened yesterday, and bombs started arriving at the homes of people I know, I was Hillary Clinton's running mate. I'm Joe Biden's friend. I'm Barack Obama's friend. When the bombs started arriving at their homes, and you don't know how many are out there, of course, first thing I did is I called my wife. I was doing an event in Culpeper yesterday. We live in Richmond. So I called my wife and I said, please do not pick up any package that gets delivered. And then we called the Richmond police, and we also called the post office in our neighborhood that gets the mail that gets delivered to us. We wouldn't want somebody in the post office. And I'm sure every member of the House of Congress probably did just what I did. My daughter works in the building where Robert De Niro has his office in New York. So one of the packages delivered to De Niro's office. So I reached out to her first thing when I heard about the De Niro thing. So it's a challenging time. It makes you worry about your loved ones, but you just got to plow on and do your work. And so that's what we do. Thanks for asking that. How about others? Standing right there in the Bethany. Sure.
My name's Sam Bartolomeo. I'm just curious, how do you think we should solve the caravan coming to the United States, and do you think we can do it across partisan lines and find a way that we could all agree on the way
I hope so.
to fix it?
Is it Samuel?
Yes, sir.
Samuel. I'll go back to front of your question. We ought to be able to come up with a bipartisan immigration reform bill. We hadn't done one since 1986. When it was done under President Reagan, it was bipartisan. When I came to the Senate in 2013, we did a bipartisan immigration reform bill that got nearly 70 votes, Democratic and Republican. And it truly was comprehensive, massive investments in border security. protection for dreamers, path to citizenship for people who would be here and pay taxes and take criminal background check and work for 12 or 13 years, helping employers figure out the status of employees, student visas, tourist visas, worker visas. It was comprehensive. But when we passed it in the Senate, we couldn't get it through the Republican House. In fact, they've never taken the bill up yet. I think there's a very strong chance that the Democrats will take the House in November. It's tougher on the Senate side. If they do, I think they will take up our bill that's just been sitting there now for 5 years, that's truly comprehensive, take it up, improve it. It was 5 years ago. I'm sure they can find some ways to make it better and send it back to us. The votes are still there for this bill in the Senate. And then we would put it on President Trump's desk. And look, I'm sure he would threaten to veto, and we'd have to go back and forth, but that's fine, that's the process. So I think we're really close to getting the comprehensive solution done, but what about the right now? Why is the caravan occurring? I worked in Honduras. I worked in the part of Honduras where many of these people are from. They fear for their lives. The violence in their neighborhoods are so extreme that they fear for their lives. Why do they fear for their lives? Because drug gangs turn their neighborhoods into shooting wars. Why are there drug gangs in their neighborhood? They're not using the drugs. The drug gangs are in their neighborhood because U.S. citizens buy so many drugs. And so the drugs come from South America up, and we send cash south, and the cash going through those economies that are so poor create gangs that are willing to fight like anything to control some portion of money, and it turns neighborhoods into shooting galleries where people are unsafe. And so parents have to make this wrenching decision about, do they leave their home, everything they know behind, or sometimes send their children unaccompanied? So the violence and the challenge in many of these neighborhoods is sadly connected to us, to a problem that we have. Now, when President Obama was in office, he realized if you're going to stop people leaving Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador, the best way to stop a caravan is to give people hope so they can stay in their own neighborhoods. And so the United States was investing in economic development and security in these three countries. President Trump has slashed those investments. Slashed the investments in security, slashed the investments in economic development. And so people feel more of a need to leave as violence increases. There was an election in Honduras that the Organization for American States said was corrupt and should be rerun. I said the OAS is right, that the election should be rerun, but President Trump said, no, that's fine, we'll recognize this government. People are dissatisfied with the corrupt election. That's another reason to leave. If people decide to leave, they got to come through Guatemala and Mexico before they get to the United States. We could deal with the Mexican officials and the government to stop a caravan or let people be there, but if you're going to deal with the Mexican government, you can't call Mexicans rapists and criminals and call Mexican officials names and then say, oh, by the way, now let's cooperate. And finally, we put a bill on President Trump's desk in February, $25 billion of border security, and he turned it down. I've come to the conclusion that this president really doesn't want to solve the immigration issue, that he wants to wave it around and use it to whip people up at election time, and that he's not that interested in solving it. But that's why I think it's so important for us to put the comprehensive bill on his desk and say, okay, by the way, now, here's a bill on your desk that really solves this, that's bipartisan. Now what are you going to do? But I think we got to get that bill on his desk. Thank you for asking.
Thank you, Senator.
Here in the brief.
A very similar question to that. How do you believe would be an effective way to solve that problem by legalizing marijuana or other drugs?
So how to solve our addiction problem? How to solve our addiction problem? The question was, how could we solve our addiction problem by legalizing marijuana, for example? So let me talk about marijuana and other drugs. I am the co-sponsor of a bill at the federal level to decriminalize marijuana at the federal level, to eliminate the federal marijuana laws. States would still make their own decisions on state law. And I'm doing that for two reasons. Number one, in terms of the law enforcement priorities of the federal government, we have a lot more important things to focus on than marijuana. And number two, the federal marijuana laws have been used very disproportionately against minorities. So the bill that I have in with Chuck Schumer and Bernie Sanders, and there's one other co-sponsor I'm playing on, I think it might be Tammy Duckworth. Our bill would decriminalize marijuana at the federal level. It would let anyone out of federal prison who's there for a marijuana offense, and it would also expunge anybody's criminal record. Even if you were in prison a long time ago, we should take that off your record so it doesn't block you from getting a job, etc. So that's federal marijuana laws. Generally, though, on addiction issues, I do not believe that legalization of drugs is going to help us with addiction. I think it's likely to make it worse. Likely to make it worse. So I think what we need to do to tackle addiction is a number of things. We need to invest more in prevention and treatment. You shouldn't have to get arrested before you get a good treatment program to break an addiction. There should be more community-based treatment and addiction programs. We need more research. A lot of the addiction, 3/4 of the OD deaths in the country, last year 72,000 people died of overdoses, just last year. During the whole Vietnam War, 56,000 Americans died. So what that means is we're losing a war every year to despair and despondency of addiction. 3/4 of the deaths were from opioids. And sadly, the opioid addiction crisis was pushed by pharmaceutical companies and doctors and people in white coats who said, you have a sports injury. You had your wisdom teeth extracted. Here's 30 days of an opioid-based pain medication. And a whole lot of people got hooked on opioids when they never should have been prescribed them to begin with. So we need to have research into non-opioid-based strategies for dealing with pain. And then we do need some targeted law enforcement strategies. So for example, fentanyl, that's super potent opioid, comes in Mexico, China, and FedEx packages in the mail. We're going to need some strategies to better interdict it. But I think the first thing we have to do is deal with addiction as a public health problem, not just as a 3 strikes you're out, it's a crime, deal with it as a public safety problem. I think addictions are like mental health. They're a public health problem. We have to break down the stigma and provide more treatment. So that's the way I would look at the addiction problem. See, there's a yellow shirt all the way in the back.
When you said liberty and justice for all,
Yeah.
do you think that it is just for someone that has, let's say, is just living a regular medium life to have to pay for somebody that made poor life decisions?
Well, that's it. So, it's a very interesting question. So, I mean, and this is like a big philosophical question, right? It's not just about government. It's generally, we are not just hunters and gatherers living on our own. We are living in a community. And so I pay taxes, and those go for some services I use, and those go for some services that I may never need. They go for some services that might be driven by somebody making a bad decision. So for example, when we buy health insurance, we're putting our premiums into a bucket that are covering all kinds of health conditions, some of which may be driven by bad decisions, smoking when you shouldn't, but some of which are also driven by the unfortunate accidents of heredity. So why does somebody get a hereditary predisposition to a disease that I don't get? And so to live in society, we're going to affect one another, and I do believe we have some responsibilities to support one another. Now, there are areas where, just to give you an example, some social services in the country can be conditioned upon your immigration status. We don't condition receiving K-12 education on immigration status. That is for any child of the eligible age, but there are some social services that we condition. So there's no one-size-fits-all answer to the question. But I do believe if we're going to live in society, if we get the ability to drive on roads that other people paid for, or turn on a light, have our lights come out on our house, and earlier generations made the investment in our utility infrastructure, we have obligations to each other as well. So big, important question. No one-size-fits-all answer, but when we're living in community, I think we have obligations to one another. Here, young lady in red glasses. Yes.
Speaking of healthcare, do you have a specific plan to make healthcare more affordable to everyone? I read it on your website that you are the co-sponsor of, I think it's Medicaid X.
Medicare X, yes.
So do you have a plan to maybe expand that or try to introduce a bill to make it on a federal level, I think? Because the healthcare now is...
No, great question. So the question is about healthcare. What are the proposals about healthcare? And I'm on the health committee. So yeah, I do have a bill. There's probably 3 big proposals out there to provide healthcare to more people or change the healthcare system. One is my colleague on the committee, Bernie Sanders. He and others have a bill called Single Medicare for All. It would basically create a government healthcare program, or at least government financed healthcare that would be Medicare that everyone in the country would get, and it would be supported by tax revenue. There's a second Republican proposal that's a block grant proposal. We take everything we spend on healthcare at the federal level and just divide that money up and hand it back to states and let states do, experiment, do their own programs. I have a different program, and you're correct, it's called Medicare X. This is what Medicare X would do. The Centers for Medicaid and Medicare Services administer Medicaid and Medicare. Medicare is the program for seniors, healthcare for seniors. So when you get to retirement age, you paid in part of your taxes over your life, and then you get basic health coverage as a senior. That's what Medicare is. But I would direct Medicare to develop an insurance policy to sell. I call it Medicare X because you can buy insurance policies on something called the exchange, health exchange. So I'd have Medicare develop an insurance policy that covered the basic health benefits of Obamacare and put it on the exchange so that anybody who wanted to could buy it. What would this do? Medicare doesn't have to collect for a profit. Medicare doesn't have to pay a return to shareholders. Medicare doesn't have to pay state, local, federal taxes. Medicare doesn't have to pay fancy salaries. Medicare doesn't have to advertise on the evening news. Doesn't have to set up a distribution network. It's already got one. So a Medicare policy would be very reasonably priced compared to private insurance. It would still have a premium. If you qualify for a subsidy under the Affordable Care Act, you could use that subsidy to drop the premium even lower. But my belief is if you put that policy on the exchange, a whole lot of people will say, I can afford that. Or I'd rather have that than the more expensive policy that I'm paying. So it would, I think, dramatically expand healthcare coverage. But your point, and you asked the question in a precise way, just doing that would not necessarily guarantee that everyone would have health insurance. But it would dramatically expand it by offering a lower cost option to everyone. And it would do it without increasing taxes by a penny, increasing the deficit by a penny, touching the Medicare trust fund. And it wouldn't increase taxes with deficit because you charge a premium for it. And you would have to collect it. It's just that Medicare would be able to operate at a lower cost than a private insurance company. And I think a lot of people would choose that insurance and would find that would be a smart way to expand health coverage. But no, great question. You're right here in the check blue. I have a hard time describing that category of check.